Can you improve chemistry between you and Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, for sure. People don't really understand how how difficult it is rookie year.
Right.
Want to do what you want to do, but at the same time, everyone watching the game from the TV or the stands doesn't understand how the game has to slow down for that individual. But as he gets more comfortable, he's going to continue to grow, and I truly believe that.
To me, the Arizona Cardinals are one of the most peculiar teams in the NFL, and I'm not saying that necessarily in a bad way. If anything, I'm saying it in a very intriguing way. And in this NFL season preview, the third one specifically for the NFC West, we're going to be talking about why the Arizona Cardinals are better than you think. There's a lot of moving factors to why I say that. I think one person that we unequivocally correlate to this team is Kyler Murray and the type of success that he's had throughout his young career. We've seen him win Rookie of the Year in 2019. We've seen him have a lot of ups and downs, particularly tearing his ACL in 2022. And in the past couple of seasons, playing some decent football, but sometimes it was up and down as well too. And he signed in July of 2022 a 5-year, $230 million contract extension worth $160 million guaranteed. The expectation for him has really to be a top 10 level quarterback, and he's had those flashes of moments of being that. But I think it's safe to say that last season it wasn't necessarily his best, but it wasn't awful either. Yes, he threw for nearly 4,000 passing yards, throwing for 3,851 to be specific, but he had 21 passing touchdowns and 11 interceptions. That's not the worst ratio, but that's certainly not the best. He ranked 9th in QBR with 66.5. And then last season, he had 572 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. So essentially 26 total touchdowns and 11 interceptions for nearly 4,300 total yards. We can certainly agree that 2020 and 2021 seasons have for sure been his best seasons so far in the NFL as a quarterback. If you want to break down the stats real quick, in 2020, Kyler Murray had a 94 passer rating, throwing for nearly 4,000 yards, 26 passing touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. Alongside of that, having 819 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. So essentially, he accounted for close to 5,000 yards and 37 total touchdowns. And then in 2021, I think it's safe to say the 2021 season in its entirety has been the most successful in the Kyler Murray era. They were 11-6 that season. They made it to the playoffs, although they were mollywhopped by the Los Angeles Rams 34-11 in the wild card round. I think that's, in terms of a total team success standpoint, that was the most successful season that the Cardinals have had, really potentially in the past near decade, because prior to that season, the last year that the Cardinals had made the playoffs before 2021 was 2015. But in that season, Kyler Murray, he had a 100.6 passer rating with over 3,700 passing yards, 24 passing touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And in the rushing game there, he had nearly half as many yards as he had rushing wise in 2020, but he had 416 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. And we know how dynamic of a dual threat quarterback that he is. I mean, he's definitely a fantasy quarterback that you want to have, but in terms of an actual real quarterback that you want to have in your franchise, the concerns are still there, height standpoint, and they always will be. But we can't dismiss the fact that he is a talented quarterback. He's about to turn 28 years old on Thursday. At that 5'10" frame, though, I think it is reasonable to ask if he's a quarterback that you can truly win with. And my retort to that is, what level of winning are you asking? Because we've seen tons of quarterbacks in this league be the definition of game managers, or even less, you still win with having a dominant defense and things of that nature too. And that's one thing that we will focus on throughout this video as well, because if you look at a head coach in Jonathan Gannon, who came from the Philadelphia Eagles, being hired in 2023, he is a great defensive mind. If you look at the stats defensively for the Cardinals in his tenure in the past couple of years, it's actually been a monumental turnover. It was very difficult for this Cardinals team in Gannon's first season, really just trying to establish a culture. After previously going 4-13 in the 2022 season, they were essentially equally as bad, honestly. They had a 4-13 season as well that year too. And let me go through some of these defensive stats, because they are pretty horrid. In the 2023 NFL season, the Cardinals ranked 31st, second to last in total defense. They also ranked 25th in defensive yards allowed, allowing over 355 per game. And they were second worst in the league in terms of giving up the most total points, giving up 455. That was awful, but in 2024, really they revolutionized not only their defense, but their team overall. After going 4-13 in the 2022 and 2023 seasons, they were 8-9 last year, and defensively they improved significantly. They were ranked second in the NFL in terms of total points allowed, allowing 379, which is certainly a lot less than the 455 that they gave up in the 2023 season. They were also 15th in the league for rushing yards allowed, and they ranked 20th in passing yards allowed. So that certainly was an improvement, and they had a lot of good wins. I mentioned it previously in my 49ers video that I posted previewing their season. If you haven't watched that already, go check that out. But they dominated the 49ers in terms of their matchups in the 2024 season. Look no further than the final game of the season in week 18, when they almost put 50 on the 49ers, winning 47-24. I know you can't necessarily look at that in a vacuum, because like for the 49ers, 49ers and Joshua Dobbs started. But that was some good momentum there. And I bring up those 2 wins over the 49ers, winning 47-24 in week 18, but also they beat them earlier in the season 24-23 in a close matchup when Brock Purdy did play. Actually, their defense forced 2 interceptions out of Brock Purdy, and although players who weren't utilized a lot in the offense last year, which we'll expound on more throughout this video because I think that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray will have a better rapport this season, they were still able to utilize a running game at a high level, and of course Kyler Murray ran well in that game too. It just shows that this team was definitely more complementary in the 2024 season compared to the 2023 and 2022 seasons. So I bring all of that up to say defensively in combination with Kyler Murray, asking if he has what it takes to be a quarterback that you can win with. I think he absolutely is. You have to have the right type of playmakers around him, but also defensively the right scheme to help create turnovers and give your offense to have great cohesion to play together both in the trenches offensively and defensively. Budda Baker at the safety position for the Arizona Cardinals I think is one of the most underrated secondary players in the league, criminally I might add. Had 95 solo tackles last season, 1 forced fumble, no interceptions, but he also had 5 pass deflections. I think he's a really good player in terms of honing into the identity of the Arizona Cardinals and Jonathan Gannon defense. Budda is a great player. Adding to that defense though, I really love them bringing in Josh Sweat, who was huge and integral for that Philadelphia Eagles defense last year, who ended up winning the Super Bowl. Sweat really had a career year last season in 2024, having 41 total tackles, 8 sacks, and 15 quarterback hits. He also had 9 TFLs too. I think he's going to be a real enforcer at the outside linebacker position in Jonathan Gannon's scheme that really utilizes a lot of zone coverage, and he likes to disguise his coverages at times as well too. And he also uses a 4-3 and sometimes some 3-4 fronts depending on the matchup and team that he's playing against, but that really just provides a lot of flexibility, honestly, which is why they were able to see that type of improvement that they had from the 2023 season to 2024 in terms of their defense being able to create more turnover and limit opposing offenses. They also added more depth defensively, like an Akeem Davis-Kathir at the linebacker position, a David Thomason at defensive tackle, Mikel Walker linebacker, and an LJ Collier at the defensive line. But one move that I absolutely love that they made in the draft is drafting Will Johnson in the 2nd round. This guy is going to be an absolute steal in my opinion, and he was drafted 47th overall. There's a lot of injury concerns in terms of what he went through last season, some of the nagging injuries that he had. There were some reports that the toe injury that he had, it involved torn ligaments and it kept him from participating in the draft combine, and he was really projected to be a top 10 pick going into last year's draft, but he ended up slipping to 47 to the Arizona Cardinals, and that is a beautiful thing because if you go through the stats and really look at the tape of Will Johnson, he is a guy that's very sticky in coverage, and he's went toe to toe with a player like a Marvin Harrison Jr. who are now teammates. But while Marvin Harrison Jr. was at Ohio State and Will Johnson was at Michigan, they had their battles together, and now them two being on the same team together for the future potentially, that's a beautiful thing. And if you look at the 2023 season when they won a national championship in Michigan, Will Johnson had a great impact that season. He had 27 total tackles and 1 TFL, but really the one that sticks out the most is 4 interceptions. And then last season, despite only playing 6 games, he had 2 interceptions as well, including 2 pick 6, and he had a pick 6 as well in 2023 that I forgot to mention as well too. I think that he's going to be a player that really just adds to this defense, not only versatility, but a player who, if he lives up to his initially projected draft status, is going to be a huge win for them going forward to perform at a high level for the Arizona Cardinals defense. To me, I think this offense is really ready to take a next step in this 2025 season because of the pieces that they have. And a James Conner who had 236 carries for nearly 1,100 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. And in 2023, he had similar production, having 208 carries for 1,040 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns in 13 games. He's a really good running back. And I know that he just turned 30 years old in May, but he's still playing at a pretty high level, and he kind of not necessarily on the same level at all. I'm not saying this, but he still is a running back that's being very productive that we've seen play good at an older age, not on the same level of a Derrick Henry, but maybe like a Raheem Mostert in terms of how he played with the Miami Dolphins a couple years ago. But really for me, why I think that the Arizona Cardinals could be really good and be a real contender in the NFC West, the NFC West specifically, I'm saying to win a division. I'm not necessarily saying to be a contender in the NFC or be a Super Bowl contender. I'm not saying that at all, but I think that they are real playoff threats and real sneaky contenders in that aspect is because of weapons like a Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. We're gonna have a lot of time to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. and I'll talk about Trey McBride even more throughout the video too. But last year, I think it's safe to say Trey McBride had a career year, and it's crazy that he didn't have more touchdowns than he did. He would always get near to scoring touchdowns last year. I know it was frustrating maybe for fantasy owners, but he had amazing production because in 2024, Trey McBride, he ranked 4th in receptions in amongst of tight ends, over 1,100 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, having a Pro Bowl caliber year. And he was rewarded after the season as he received a new 4-year contract extension worth $76 million and $43 million guaranteed. It also makes him the 2nd highest paid tight end currently after a George Kittle, who was also extended this offseason. But Trey McBride, he had a great season. That was only his 3rd year. He was drafted in 2022 in the 2nd round. I think he's going to continue to expand and playing at high level. And he's only 25 years old as well right now. He doesn't turn 26 until November. So he's going to be huge for the integral of this team and a huge weapon for this offense, as we see in the way that he was used last season. And Marvin Harrison Jr., I think it's safe to say that a lot of people were quote unquote disappointed by the season that he had, but still he had a really good season. And I think the expectations are valid in terms of how special he can be this upcoming year, because we saw what he did in college, having 2 straight seasons over 1,200 receiving yards in 2022 and 2023, both seasons having 14 receiving touchdowns. He played at a high level in 2022 with a CJ Stroud, and then in 2023 even with a Kyle McCord, who wasn't viewed as the best quarterback but still had some good production with Marvin Harrison Jr. So when Marvin Harrison Jr. was drafted to the Arizona Cardinals last year, it was expected that he would put up similar numbers or even go crazy or even play to the level of like a Malik Neighbors or a Brian Thomas Jr. in their rookie years. And I think it's safe to compare him to them for sure in terms of who the top receivers may end up being from the 2024 NFL draft. But I think it's hard to compare in a vacuum to those two guys. I mean, Brian Thomas Jr., for example, he was drafted later in the first round. No one saw that he was going to perform at the level that he did, having over 1,200 receiving yards. And same with Malik Neighbors, he had 1,200 receiving yards as well too. And even to an extent of Rome Odunze, but Marvin Harrison Jr., he had better numbers than Rome Odunze, so that's why I didn't say his name. But I think those 4 specific receivers right there, they will continue to be compared to each other throughout the upcoming years. But even though Marvin Harrison Jr. only had 62 receptions for 885 receiving yards, he still had 8 touchdowns. Those 8 touchdowns ranked second out of all rookie receivers last year, only behind Brian Thomas Jr., who had 10. So he still definitely showed that big play ability at times. He averaged 14.3 yards per reception. And I think that him adding a reported 11 pounds of muscle is only going to help him in terms of being able to be used in that X receiver type of role. But I think sometimes you can maybe even utilize Marvin Harrison Jr. out of the slot. And we'll see how Drew Petzing, their offensive coordinator, continues to use him, because this will be his 2nd year with Marvin Harrison Jr. and his 3rd year specifically with the Arizona Cardinals. But I say all that about Marvin Harrison Jr. to say it's very early, and I think that this season, if anything, he's going to dominate even more. I think that he's going to show why he was the first receiver taken in the 2024 NFL draft at 4th overall. But with that being said though, guys, before we talk about why I think the Arizona Cardinals will be better than you think, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram at SwaggyRush, and also on Twitter/X at SwaggyRush as well. On TikTok at SwaggyRush02 for shorts, reels, content, things of that nature too. This is our 3rd video previewing a team from the NFC West. Of course, the final team that we'll preview in the NFC West after this will be the Seattle Seahawks. So stay tuned for that. And then after this division, we'll be talking about the AFC West. But with all that being said though, guys, let's talk about why the Arizona Cardinals will be sneaky good and be a team that's better than what you think they'll be in this 2025 season. As previously stated, I believe that the Arizona Cardinals want to set the tone in their identity on defense. And they proved that not only with their defensive acquisitions in free agency, and as I also mentioned in the draft, drafting in the 2nd round Will Johnson, but drafting Walter Nolan with the 16th overall pick in the 1st round emphasized that statement, as well as they want to continue to beef up in the trenches and own the line of scrimmage offensively, but even more so defensively, as I can tell. And Walter Nolan, before transferring to Ole Miss last season at Texas A&M, he recorded 5 total sacks in his freshman and sophomore seasons. But last year at Ole Miss, he had 25 solo tackles and 23 assisted, so essentially nearly 50 tackles, 14 TFLs, and 6.5 sacks. Had a lot of production last year, with alongside being a consistent All-American. I think he's going to be a young player that's going to help not only in the run game, which of course can be improved, but I think even creating havoc as a pass rush and just getting into the offensive line's faces into the quarterback. Nolan is going to be able to be a good presence there. Alongside with a player like Walter Nolan being there in his rookie year, they also brought back Calais Campbell, who they ironically drafted in the 2nd round of the 2008 draft. So really it's like a homecoming and a whole career coming full circle for Calais Campbell adding in there. So that's some veteran presence as well to that Cardinals defensive line. So that just further proves my point, in my opinion, that they're going to try to cause havoc against opposing teams, not only in the NFC West, but in their schedule overall, which we will further talk about in a few. But before talking about their schedule, I just want to continue to emphasize, I just want to highlight how integral and paramount the chemistry between Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. can, in all cases, transform this team. As Kyler Murray has said, Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't even scratched the surface as what he can be in the NFL as a wide receiver. And we all know the reputation, his dad being a Hall of Famer with the Indianapolis Colts, being one of the greatest receivers of all time. Marvin Harrison Jr. is for sure wanting to live up to that, but also create his own legacy. And last season, like I mentioned earlier, the stats, they weren't as bad as most people make it seem. He still averaged 14.3 yards per reception, but there were a lot of cases where I feel like Kyler Murray could have connected more with Marvin Harrison Jr. In the Buffalo Bills game earlier in the season, there was a play where Marvin Harrison Jr. was wide open and Kyler missed him. That would have for sure been a touchdown. And if you look at some of these stats, it kind of shows there was a lot to be desired, but there's also a lot of improvement that can be had too. in this upcoming season. So if we look at his rookie year in a vacuum in terms of some certain stats, in 6 out of his 17 games last season, he had fewer than 40 yards. And also he had a 53.4% catch rate and averaged 7.3 yards per target. But per reception, as I mentioned, he averaged 14.3 yards per reception. So that's a different discrepancy for sure there. And you already know in this offense with a player like a Kyler Murray, who's a dual threat quarterback, they're going to have a run heavy type of scheme. Also, when you have a player utilized like a Trey McBride and now with a Marvin Harrison Jr. as well too, and a Zay Jones to an extent, obviously he's not a great receiver, but he's a solid receiver, you're going to have room to create for your playmakers and really marry the run and the pass game together. And with a Marvin Harrison Jr., I think you have to utilize him a lot in motion. And that's why I briefly mentioned earlier in the intro, things like using him in a slot, using him a lot in motion just to see what coverages defenses are in to try to throw them off balance. So then Marvin Harrison Jr. can just be put in situations to win his routes and create one-on-one opportunities for him to terrorize opposing defenses. I think the problem with what a lot of people had from Marvin Harrison Jr.'s production last year is because there will be games like, for example, in week 2 against the Los Angeles Rams when the Cardinals blew out the Rams 41-10. He had 4 receptions for 130 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And then against the Miami Dolphins later in the season, they won and he had 6 receptions for 111 receiving yards and a touchdown. But then there will be games like, for example, against the Chargers, 3 receptions for 21 receiving yards. 2 weeks in a row against the Bears and the Jets, both games, one game having 34 receiving yards, the next having 54 receiving yards. Then he would have in another game 6 receptions for 96 receiving yards against the Rams their second time. So it's just a lot of up and down, and that's not necessarily in terms of his production, that's just in terms of maybe the opportunity. And I think that's what the Cardinals have to improve this season, putting him in opportunities to really at times maybe even force him to football, because he's a great playmaker and he's a great route runner. I know he was a rookie last year, but he's shown that in flashes last season and throughout college, and you see the type of talent that he has. And now him honing on his body, continuing to improve muscle and add muscle, you have to give your playmakers opportunities to make plays. And I firmly believe that we're going to see an improved Marvin Harrison Jr. I think it's no doubt that he can for sure reach well over 1,000 receiving yards this season, but it's not just making a number, it's about the impact as well too. And I think that he's going to have a better impact on his team this year, maybe even having potentially 80 to 100 receptions this season. If I had to predict his stat line this season, I would probably say 92 receptions for around 1,100 to 1,200 receiving yards and 10 to 11 touchdowns. And I think that's improvement for sure, and he's going to continue to do that throughout his career because we know the type of player that he can be. He has a top 10 to top 5 caliber type of talent and ability. It's just about the Cardinals and putting him in position to win, and I think that they certainly will. The Cardinals schedule this season also shows why I think that they'll be a team better than what a lot of people expect. They have the 6th easiest schedule this upcoming season, and we know they play in that NFC West that is always competitive for sure. But if you want to look at their games last season, 2024 in the NFC West, in 2024 they went 3-3. They were 500 against teams in the NFC West, beating the San Francisco 49ers 2 times. They got swept by the Seahawks actually, but they did, as I mentioned earlier, they beat the Rams 1 time, and then later in the season in week 17 they lost to the Rams. So they definitely didn't get bullied at all, and in all those games they played well, played competitively. The only game they had a thud is when they first played against the Seahawks, losing 16-6 in that game. But for this season and this upcoming year, like I mentioned, 6th easiest strength of schedule, and I think they have the potential to start off strong. They play 2 NFC South teams in week 1 and week 2. They play against the Saints in week 1, the Panthers in week 2. In all intensive cases, in my opinion, at least for sure, week 1 should be an easy win. The Panthers, I feel like they low-key could be a little bit more competitive this season. I like some of the moves that they've done, and we'll talk about them in a couple of weeks when I do their review video. But I think that they can start off 2-0 for the 49ers game in week 3. That'll be certainly interesting. But like I mentioned, they swept the 49ers last season, so of course the 49ers are going to play with a chip on their shoulder trying to get back in that aspect. But the Cardinals, I think that they're a physical and tough football team, so they'll be embracing that. Then they play against the Seahawks for the first time, the Titans. That should be a relatively straightforward game. I'm interested and intrigued to see how Cam Ward will perform in his rookie season, but I would favor the Cardinals in that matchup. I would favor them against the Colts as well in the following week. The Packers, that'll be a tough game as well too, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's a tough and competitive game, and ultimately if they beat Green Bay, because both teams are kind of similar in terms of the fact that they want to own the line of scrimmage from an offensive perspective, running the football first. So we'll see there. Dallas Cowboys game, I think that's going to be very interesting. Look no further than the 2023 season when a lot of people thought the Cowboys were going to blow out the Cardinals, and the Cardinals ended up winning that game 28-16, and they ran the football down the Dallas Cowboys defense's throat, running for 222 rushing yards as well. And I'm not going to lie, I think the Cowboys, they'll be improved, and I've said it in my season preview for them. I think they're going to be a team that's capable of winning 10 to maybe even 12 games potentially, but I wouldn't be surprised if on Monday Night Football if the Cardinals were able to get one in that matchup. So that'll be a really good game in my opinion. And then they play the Seahawks again. They play against the 49ers as well for a second time. Jaguars, I like them, and I like the Cardinals in that game. Buccaneers, that's a tough game as well too. In my opinion, that's honestly a pick'em game. Then they'll play against the Rams. As I mentioned, they split their games against Los Angeles last year, so that'll be really good. They play against the Texans too. I think that'll be a nice next game as well. Also, two similar teams want to hone in on defense and create turnovers. They play the Falcons, then they play the Bengals and the Rams again in week 18. So like I said, they have a favorable schedule for sure. I want to select the games I think that they're going to win, certainly, and predict their record. I think that they're going to go 10-7 this upcoming year and be a viable wild card threat. But just because they go 10-7 doesn't mean they're going to make the playoffs, because we saw with the Seattle Seahawks last season, they were 10-7 and they still missed the playoffs, which is a testament to how competitive things were in the NFC. 3 teams from the NFC North making it, 2 from the NFC East. Then you had the Buccaneers winning the division and things of that nature too, and all stuff like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if the NFC is equally or even more competitive in this season in terms of getting a final playoff spot. But the Cardinals, I think that they'll be better than the 8-9 season that they were last year. There were a lot of games last season where you can make the argument they should have won. Earlier in the year against the Buffalo Bills, they were leading 17-10 in the first half before losing to the Bills 34-28 in that week 1 matchup. They lost against the Lions by a touchdown, which we know that team was historic in terms of an offensive regular season, but they lost in the divisional round against the Commanders. They got blown out by the Commanders last year. That was a game that was embarrassing for them, one of their thuds for sure. But there's a lot of cases in where, for example, they played against the Chargers last season. They should have won that game. They only lost by 2 points, but they were unable to get things going offensively. That's an example of not only the Marvin Harrison Jr. point, but just their offense stalling in general in that game. And then like losing a 1-score game by 1 point against the Vikings. This team is positioned to do a lot of great things this season and be improved. And I think that they're going to be better than what a lot of people think. A lot of people probably think that they're going to be mediocre again, win 8 to maybe even 9 games, but I realistically can see them winning 10 games. Shoot, it wouldn't be surprising if they won 11, just in terms of the type of talent that this team has both offensively and defensively. It's just for them to put it together and execute. I think execution is a big point that this team needs to ultimately utilize and prioritize so they can have a real playoff run and be a competitive team in the NFC, and a team that a lot of opponents respect when going against them and knowing that it's going to be a tough battle playing against the Arizona Cardinals. But y'all for sure let me know in the comments down below what you think of the Arizona Cardinals this year going into the 2025 season. How competitive do you think that they'll be? Do you think that they'll be mediocre, average, and miss the playoffs, or agree with me in saying that should be contending for a wild card spot, one of those final wild card positions in the NFC playoffs? Y'all let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications, guys. This is our second to last video in the NFC West. Our last NFL season preview for this division will be with the Seattle Seahawks. Stay tuned for that. And then ultimately we'll be moving on to the AFC West. Firstly, talking about the Kansas City Chiefs and then getting more into that division. So y'all stay tuned, guys. Trying to post 3 to 4 season previews per week as we continue to ramp up in this month of August. Then getting closer to week 1 on September 4th with the Dallas Cowboys playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. We're getting so close, guys. It'll be here before we know it. I love this game of football. Love previewing every single team. And this is going to be a special and legendary season, I feel like, on the journey to Super Bowl 60 for sure. Love you guys always. Keep Jesus Christ at the center of your life always. Know that he has great purpose for you guys. You are here for a reason. You're going to do a lot of great things. Remember that. I'm here for y'all always. Y'all have a good one and keep being blessed. Peace.